Mark Christian. Welcome to the Homilist Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I ask every guest, hey, who are a couple of guys that I need to get in contact with? And then they give me a name. Talk to this guy, talk to this guy, talk to this guy. Yours was feedback from listeners. They came in, they said, listen, get Mark Christian. And then they said, have him talk about leadership and have him talk about conflict resolution. That's what it was. It was conflict resolution and leadership. Have Mark Christian talk about those things. I said, okay. They're like, do it. Get it done. Hurry. Hustle up. Get it done. So I'm excited. So thanks for joining me on this.
Well, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's excellent. So tell us where you are.
I'm in Oronogo, Missouri, which is a town of about 2,000 people north of Joplin, and it's a 65-year-old church. And I've been here 10 years.
Wow, 65-year-old church.
Yeah, it had a big turnaround in the late 80s, and went from a small family church of about 125 people. To a church much larger than that over the past 30 so years. 3 different pastors have led it, and it's all been incremental growth. And it's been fun to come and see what's happened and try to understand why it happened.
Yeah, that's excellent. How big is Oronogo itself?
The town's about 2,100.
Yeah.
So when we moved out here 10 years ago, it was about 1,500. And my wife looked at me and said, "Where are you taking me?" And I said, "I have no idea."
And so the church outnumbers the community at this point, right?
Yeah, we run, depends on which way the wind's blowing. It's between about 2,700, 3,000 people on a weekend.
Yeah, that's excellent. It's always cool to find a church where the church has found a way to outgrow population-wise the community that it sits in.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a pretty cool thing.
I was at a gathering of preachers, as well as the preaching summit in Indianapolis. When I know you had Jeff Fall on previously, and when he was opening that, my buddy and I went to it, and I remember somebody standing up and talking about this church in Missouri that made no sense when it came to growth because it had no population base. It was in a very small country town, country roads out to it, none of the conveniences. And to find myself there about 15 years later is pretty amazing. That's
really cool. It's really cool. Well, I grew up in Tyro, Kansas.
Okay.
And so you're talking about a population of 250, and the church itself had just been growing drastically, over the last, I think at one point, over 1,000 every Sunday, which a town of 250 people, that's
right.
quite a strange thing. So yeah, really cool. Really cool. Yeah, that's awesome. That reminds me a lot of, where we grew up. That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. So you've been there how long? 10 years?
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah. I was in Michigan for 22 years at a church right out of college. Started as the youth minister, became the preacher, and then we left there in 2009 to come here.
Excellent. So when we talked on the phone the other day, you were talking about a book, and so I got the book, and How to Think.
Yes.
I didn't completely finish it, but it was a pretty decent read.
Yeah. I think it helps us sermon writing. I think it's the thing that I picked up on. It was not only reasoning ourselves through the scripture, but how do we reason with other people? Yeah. And to have that intellectual debate, because you and I both know faith is an intellectual exercise as much as it is just trusting. And we're in an entertainment culture. Getting people to think is more challenging than probably ever before. Yeah,
absolutely right. I'm coming over to Joplin tomorrow. And so one of the things that I'm talking about is when we tell stories and use parable, within scripture, you typically don't get 2 camera angles,
Right.
You get, this is the way the story went from the eyes of the storyteller. And this is how it goes. You think about how that's different than film, to where you can cut in anytime and go to another story and start giving backstory, and then you can give a different camera angle, and you can see different things that are going on behind the scenes. Where in scripture, it's really hard to kind of piece some of that stuff together, and you got to be careful piecing some of that stuff together. You can really start making some stuff up pretty easy. So, yeah. But I did enjoy that book. How to Think. What was the author's name again? I forgot.
Oh goodness, Alan Jacobs. Yeah. Jim Johnston. I think he may have been one of your professors at Ozark.
Absolutely.
Jim was the one who recommended to me at a board meeting we were at he said, "Have you read that?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You should." And he was right.
Yeah. Well, listen, Jim Johnson also suggested I read Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson. And then when my brain melted after about chapter 3, and I was like, no, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I love JP, but I'm having a hard time keeping up, buddy. Like, intellectual capacity isn't there. That was pretty good. Are you a fan of Jordan Peterson? Have you read some of his stuff?
I've read some of his stuff. I think I understand what he's doing. I struggle sometimes in the context in which he's trying to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of guys have the same mindset when it comes to that. One guy, in fact, said he's making converts better than the church.
Yeah.
To what is the question? But he is making converts, faster than the church. Yeah. I do. I always appreciate those. I always appreciate those guys, and I appreciate them from a different standpoint. I love to watch somebody on a journey, and the early days of Jordan Peterson as an atheist, as a guy who's completely shut off from all ideas like that, and then to see him start seemingly make a trek towards something that's starting to look like that. That always excites me. I'm always kind of pulling for that guy,
Right.
kind of pulling for that guy. Like, okay, come on, keep coming. This is going to be good. Keep coming. So excellent. Well, let's jump into some preaching questions here. There's a couple introductory questions. And this is just a fan favorite. What passage of scripture makes you laugh?
It's been one of my favorites since I was a kid. It's in Luke 7 when Jesus walks by the widow and her son they're carrying him to the graveside, and Jesus just reaches up, touches the casket. The part that makes me laugh is Luke gives us this powerful moment, and he says he sat up and started to talk, and then the story's over. And it has mesmerized me since I was a kid. The details. They walk him to the edge of a cliff in Nazareth. He walks through them. They got him to the cliff. They couldn't get him over the cliff, and there's no detail. And it just makes my heart smile to go, of all the things to record, why would you leave us hanging like that?
Right.
And it's that fascination with what's unsaid. Sometimes that, we, like you said earlier about parables, we can turn that in to phrases that aren't intended. Mm-hmm. But Luke is famous for taking us right to the edge, and then that detail's not important. Let's get on to the next story. And I want to know what he said. Was he talking to Jesus? Was he talking to his mom? What happened there?
Yeah. No. So how do you right? What cracks me up about that story is he came to life and started talking, and I wonder if it was the same story that he was telling when he died. If it were something along the same, like he just came to and he's like, anyway. And so then I was talking to Jim.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what? Yeah. You've been gone for a minute here, No,
I think that's the same thing I wonder. And just those details about what did they talk about and why would they leave? Why was that not important for us to know? Yeah.
What do you do with that, preaching wise? What do you do with a story like that?
When I was younger, when I first started doing this, I would have tried to formulate an answer so that lingering tension of what's not said wouldn't get in the way. Now I absolutely surrender to that what's not said. And I stop and think it's the same thing God did to Job. Job asked him, 10, 12 questions? God answered none of them, but he gave him more things to think about than he could even answer. And I think sometimes that tension of the unexplained is part of where our faith grows most. And so I love dropping people right there and then going, we'll never know. Next story. Because it creates that same tension in me, like, God is not out to prove himself each and every day to us. He already has. He's trying to get us to trust him in the silence too. But it always makes me smile what's not said. Yeah.
One of my favorites comes from the book of Job. One of my favorite funny lines comes from the book of Job. And it's this, look at my life. I'm falling apart. Everything's terrible. And then God swoops in and he's like, what do you know about ostriches?
Yeah.
It's that line of, and then God kind of goes on this little tangent. And he's like, they're dumb, terrible mothers, terrible, lay eggs in the sand, tromp around with the huge feet. Absolutely terrible mothers. They're merciless. I mean, they're just that. But have you seen them run? Have you seen them run faster than the horse and rider? So, like, I love that. Here's Job in the midst of his misery and intensive care. And it's like, this is a terrible pastoral call, God. Like, this is a terrible pastoral call. You show up and tell me all about things that make you happy. Like, it's crazy. It's a crazy story.
It's absolutely God telling us, I know what I'm doing, even when you don't. And I love that. Right. I love that. Yeah.
That's hard. That is hard, especially for a culture and a people group who we love to button things down. We love to button things down. We like to know stuff. I want to know stuff, Mark Christian. I just want to know stuff. I want to be able to Google it and know it, know it instantly.
But we are mesmerized by mystery. Mm-hmm. And I think the beauty of what God did in Scripture was he gave us enough to whet our appetite, but he didn't satisfy our full hunger. Mm. And so if he would have answered all of our questions, we wouldn't, you and I know this, we wouldn't need faith. Yeah. And I think what's fun as you get older is to say, I don't know. And I always wonder stupid things like when you see the color of a sunset, is it possible that there's a shade of yellow in that one sunset that will never be repeated again? Mm. And when I stop and think about what God is doing all around me, is he's like, that may have been one in a moment that you saw that color no one else ever saw. And that the mystery of that is what Paul celebrates, right? Regularly. And I think when you and I become the answer men in the teaching and in the pulpit, we've stepped into a gap we're not supposed to. I think we're tour guides. We get to point out what is.
So good.
And then simply say, I don't know, man. Isn't it awesome? I don't know.
Yeah. So
it sure takes the pressure off.
Yeah, that's a good point. Speaking of which, I just finished the book of Daniel. We were preaching through Daniel. I just finished the book of Daniel, chapter 11, and I just kind of brushed up against chapter 12. Listen, I'm telling you, at the end of that, it's like, look, we're going to let this be the mystery that it is. We can ask Hal Lindsey and David Jeremiah. We can ask, look, I got nothing. I got absolutely nothing for it. Like, this is as far as I can go with it. Maybe someone else can. I can't. Absolutely. I can't take us any further. It is an absolute mystery. Some of this stuff, and it has to stay that way, doesn't it? It has to stay that way.
Creativity without those gaps, there's no creativity in any of us if everything is solved. That's why we create new things all the time. I think the whole God's dominion over creation is, I've given you all these building blocks. Go build something beautiful and honoring. And I think those gaps, that's when we form ourselves. Yeah. In those silences.
There's a wonderful podcast episode from I think it's called Radio Lab. Radio Lab, have you heard Radio Lab podcast?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. So the Radio Lab podcast, they have one on color. I don't know if you've heard this one or not. It's on.
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah, I have. It's fascinating.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Incredible. So for the listeners, you need to look up this episode because it's so cool. The first time I heard it, I was out in the yard working and I was just listening and I was like, oh, what is this? And it's talking about color. And then all of a sudden in comes these voices like, so how many cones does a human eye have? And so it starts talking about that. And then you hear these voices come up. It's like, this was the cool part to me. I'm listening to a podcast about color, and the way that they're going to depict color and how much color you see is by the number of voices that are singing a certain chorus in the background. I mean, it is a mind-blowing, it's a difficult thing to even explain, but man, I love that episode when you said that about sunsets and color and all that. That's what it made me think of, that Radio Lab episode. That's a good one. Who inspires Mark Christian? Who trips his trigger when it comes to communication, comedy, preachers, artists? Who does it for you?
Well, I've heard you ask this question before, and as a preacher, I'm going to have to repent to give you my answer. I love angry comics. I don't. Oh, yeah, see, that's the response I get from my wife too. What I love about them is not necessarily that when they go obscene, but what they really do is an angry comic for me draws a reality into my frame of reference that everybody knows. It irritates all of us, and he just deals with the humanity of it. And so when I'm cutting the lawn and I'm just wanting to giggle, there's certain guys who I wouldn't pay for their albums, but it just cracks me up when they go off on a rant. And I'm like, that is inside of me, and he's so right. So, but it's the skill of observation. It's what Seinfeld does, is what Bill Burr does, it's what Lewis Black does, that if they didn't go obscene, I'd be more comfortable with it. But actually, their anger comes from, why is this okay? Yeah. And that skill of observation has always been a part of me. And
my favorite bit is is the fair, or the art festival that his wife, Bill Burr's wife, takes him to. And
Yes.
he's standing there and he starts talking about the muffins, that the ladies got these muffins. He wants to stand there just,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, I think
that's
it's that skill of observation. I like people who dig deep enough to what John Piper says: if you rake, you get leaves; if you dig, you get diamonds.
mm,
And when it comes to the word, I love those guys who have a honed sense of observation in the scriptures, that they don't rush through those little subtle moments to notice this twist and this turn. You know, in movies, I get irritated when the music is pointing out to you, pay attention here.
mm-hmm.
And I think when you find someone who's got that innate ability, those are the guys that I want to listen to. Those are the guys that teach me something every time they talk, and I know they've earned the right to be heard. So those are I really, when I listen to podcasts, I listen to what series they're doing. If it's a topical series and it's going to be the random thoughts of a guy like me, I'm not that interested. But when they're digging a text and they're finding diamonds, man, you got my attention.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But it's that skill of observation, and that, a good comedian, whether they're your favorite kind or not, they work endlessly on a phrase and on a sentence that is perfect. And you hear them talk about it. That's why I like riding in cars with comedians, the Seinfeld thing, when he's asking them those questions, and you realize this doesn't happen by accident. This happens by intentional skill. And as writers, you and I, if we write really well, our preaching gets really good.
Yeah, that's true. Gary Goldman is one that I really enjoy. Comedian Gary Goldman. You familiar with him?
I'm not familiar with him.
He's a tall Jewish guy, and pretty clean. He's a pretty clean guy. A lot of stuff on Instagram, a lot of stuff on,
Okay.
And he talks about writing tips. And so he's on a thing right now where it's writing tips about comedy. And when you start seeing, like, okay, so what goes into producing? What goes into producing that one line and you're talking weeks and weeks of work, getting the right word, polishing the right phrase, the right setup, the right delivery. I mean, that's tough stuff. That is tough stuff. It's no wonder when you see guys who try to jump over into comedy and they're gonna go be a comedian and it doesn't work out. It's like, so there's a bunch of guys at the bar who said you're a pretty funny guy, but you're not that guy. That's a different thing altogether. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Angry comics do make me laugh, but I'm with you. Once they go over the edge, I'm like, okay, I got to check out. You don't have
to be vulgar. It's that sense of observation and that drive. That's the thing that just makes me smile.
Oh man, Bill Burr and his pit bulls. When he's talking about, it'll come undone. So yeah, excellent. I appreciate you bringing that up. That was something Dave Stone spent a lot of time talking about when he and I got together. He spent a lot of time talking about comedians and lines, and you could tell like he wants to secretly. I think he wants to be a stand-up comic. I think that's what he wants to do. Yeah,
well, he's got a mind to find that rhythm.
Yep. Yeah. And he, what else he'll do? He doesn't mind the corny,
Right.
Like, and there's some people who do. Like, I can't. The corny trips me out a little bit. I'm not comfortable with that. But he will walk right into it. He was telling me he set up a whole joke in a sermon based on if you have hugs, if you would just hug yourself on a regular basis for 10 seconds. Then it was something like that. Then it would bring the brain chemicals you need to comfort yourself and reduce anxiety. And so he moves from that into a joke, and the joke doesn't land at all. He's like, I got a really great joke, and he tells the joke, and the joke is stupid. It's just a stupid, corny joke, and it gets no laugh. To which he then goes and starts to hug himself, And he said, which provoked tons of laughter, And so that's good. I mean, guys who can do that. Gaffigan is really good at some of the corny stuff. I mean, that's impressive. Yeah, that's a good list of guys. That's a good list of guys. What kind of when it comes to your preaching style, your delivery, your preparation, the gifts that you have, what best describes the way you do what you do?
I'm a teacher more than an orator.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a baseball guy. I think we talked on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
I speak in sports metaphors very comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what God's gifted me to do is to put the ball in play, to be consistent, to make contact. There are guys that can walk on a stage and wow a crowd. That's not how God wired me. I'm a teacher. Give me 3 or 4 shots at it, and I think I can get it done. I don't know how well I get it done, but I can accomplish what we're after. And so as a teacher rather than an orator, I really work on how do you connect this piece of Scripture contextually into where people can understand it from a secondhand view. In other words, how does the original audience grab onto it and delve into that? What is the necessary information to take an American audience back to the days of Jesus in Palestine and show them the nuances that we automatically, popping those mythological bubbles we have, like how we define words compared to how they defined words, how Jesus would draw family stories, and they're so different from our families. And I find people lean in on that. And so I've just really been fortunate. The 2 churches that I've been at over the last 30 years have been churches that wanted to be taught. And I do, deep down inside, I'm as competitive as anybody. I envy the guys that can walk on an unknown stage for 35 minutes and walk off, and you're like, they set that thing on fire.
Right.
And I just think I wear people down. I'm just out there doing what I do. And I like to communicate to an audience. We have several services here. Each audience is like a personality to me. And some will laugh with you, and some want to go deeper, and some love you no matter what you do. And some people are trying to figure out if they even like you. And I love the dynamic as a communicator of altering from my notes how I'm affecting an audience and going deeper in an area where they respond to, that nod of recognition.
Yeah, sure.
Where people are like, I know that. And you're like, do you really?
Yeah.
And then you get to pry back one of the boards and show them, no, you wouldn't understand that unless you were Jewish living in the days of Jesus.
Yeah.
So, I don't know that we can self-assess. I always get uncomfortable when people ask me what I do well. I'd rather ask somebody else what that is.
Yeah.
But I know after this number of years, it seems that God benefits me and the audiences I work with more when I'm more of a teacher than an orator.
My life is built off of guys like you. I'm not one of you, but the people who surround me, the good people who surround me, are all wired just like that. Great teachers, just formulated, just right on point. Just going after it, taking care of it, knocking out the details, making sure nobody walks out not understanding something. We're going to make sure we get all the way through it. We're going to repeat it if we need to repeat it. Is everybody with me? Everybody understand this?
Yeah.
And I'm and my life is built like that. I'm on staff with Luke Bycroft here at the church, and you want to talk about he handles he's the executive pastor and the youth minister. If that gives you you're going to handle the finances, the numbers, and everything else, and you're going to come over. So you can imagine what the youth group looks like when they come in and they sit down. And Luke opens up and he's like, "All right, we're going to be starting in Leviticus. All right, So open up your Bibles," and mashes it to pieces. Takes them to the deep end of the pool. It's excellent. It's absolutely wonderful. But I can't stack blocks, let alone principles. So when it comes to teaching, I'm so bad at it. I'd much rather be asking the questions and, exercising a little curiosity on my end. But that's cool. That's cool. Dave Erickson, his job at Academy, is that right? Academy is teaching pastor. So he's the teaching pastor there. But when you hear him preach, it doesn't sound like teaching. You know what I mean? He's so much more poetic than what you would probably come to mind when you think of a teaching pastor. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, and you've had 2 of the best writers I've ever heard, and Jeff Fall and Dave Erickson. Those guys, absolutely. They write so well that I wouldn't veer off their manuscripts. I don't write that way, and so I'm kind of that composite of. I write a manuscript, but then it's just lily pads to get across the pond. There are certain points I have to hit to get where we're going, but it's kind of fun to stop on some longer than others when you see your audience is like, what? And you're like, all right, let's pause here for a moment. I can make up ground later. And it's idiosyncratic. I think we all learn the basic building blocks of how to preach, and that's necessary to understand structures that are logically designed. But then after that, I really love when someone just goes in their own personality and uses that strength and makes it idiosyncratic. I think that's beautiful. So where you feed off of teachers,
I do the same, but every now and then I just want to listen to some guy who gets my blood rushing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so I love that God's given us that ability to, what plays here in Oronogo, Missouri is not going to play in the big city. And that's okay. So I found a spot where I can fit.
That's excellent. I like the way you said that there is that desperate need for, like, I need teachers like that in my life. I mean, I joke about it all the time. The people that I study and that I read for research, sermon research, would embalm an entire audience. I mean, this stuff is drab. But I love it because what it does for me is it builds the creative detail that I need, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What was the book by McGarvey on basically the soil, the flora and the fauna of Israel? And he goes through, it's like bit by bit. Loved it. Absolutely loved it, because those little bitty pieces are so good for the storytelling when you can step into it and you can say the Rose of Sharon actually is, you know, and go in. Like, that's so valuable to me. I appreciate all that deep, hard work. I don't want to sit and explain any of it to anybody. I just want to drop it in, and you can figure it out later if you want to. That's really cool. That's really cool. How do you put your stuff together when you say you don't write like Jeff and you don't write like Dave? Give me a quick assessment of how you see how they put things together. How do they do that?
Well, I've talked to Jeff just casually about this. He's such a good writer that even listening to your interview with him, he talks about his process of writing. I basically, and this is horrible, so this is what not to do. This is what I've learned in 30 years of ministry. I can tell you what not to do. I actually begin, after I've done the book work, I actually ask myself this question, and it forces me, and that is, if I had to walk out on stage right now and teach this text, how would I approach it? And I start composing from that question. And then it either turns out to be a real bad idea, or part of my prayer is, God, inspire me when I start to say, how do I want to explain this to the church I'm at? And that process allows me then to write. I just blow everything out on paper. And then from there, I construct what are the pieces here that are really helpful for my audience. And so I've been taught by the scripture, and I try to write in such a way that if I had to walk out right now and I had 20 minutes to walk in front of this audience and teach them what I just learned, what are the pieces that are most memorable, most important, and I let the rest of it fade away. And then I write from that, probably 2/3 of manuscript. And then when I walk out on stage, I have it in front of me to guide me, but I know the steps I'm taking to get where I want to get.
I love that question.
It forces me, and I was never a kid who wrote term papers in college last minute. I'd hated that pressure. But when I asked myself if you would approach this, some of the most spirit-led moments for me have been when someone said, hey, can you go out and talk about this? And you just say to God, okay, here's an idea, here's a hook, and off you walk. And I don't want to live in that realm of not being prepared. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I think there's some people who are like, all right, this idea develops itself in my mind as I compose. Some people write and some people compose. And I think the difference is the writers have a plan. They already know the 7 steps they're going to take to get us there. There's probably people like you and me who are more in the moment, like, here would be a good angle on this that would help me explain it. And that's where I start.
That's such a good question. That's such a good question. If I had to do this in 20 minutes, or if I had to do this in, what did you say?
If I had to walk on a stage right now, how would I do this?
That's such a good question. Like that, you got my wheels grinding away, and that's pretty good. That's a good question.
Yeah, and what's helped me do is it helps me define a bad idea versus a good idea. Because if you start typing and your fingers are flying and you're inspired and your mind's running, like this would set up this and this and this, I love those moments. Sometimes I start on an angle and I go, thank the Lord I don't have to preach right now because that's horrible.
Yeah.
But I've learned the shortcuts of doing it long enough that works for me regularly. Now, I've had students who've interned here with us at the church, and they've tried it and it didn't work for them. They need to know the 7 steps they're going to take. I need to know the first 2. And then I feel real comfortable in that moment that there's going to be a progression from that. Once I get those first 2 steps, I feel like we're off and running now.
Yeah. So when you say this is a what not to do, you're being somewhat facetious, but at the same time,
I don't think one size fits all. And so when I'm listening to what you're interviewing and the guys that are talking, they all have their own individualistic style, which I think that just makes my heart happy, because I can't write like some of the, you're familiar with the name Jeff Walling?
Yes.
Okay, Walling can walk on any stage,
Yeah.
and he can wow people every single time. And I look at that, it'd be really easy to resign and go, yeah, I can't do that. But when I know that in the local church, sometimes hitting 300 is better than hitting 50 homers,
Yeah.
that I look and go, there's a place for me.
Mm-hmm.
And if people want to come and listen to what I'm learning, fantastic. And
See,
I honor that.
That's a genius phrase. That's a genius phrase. That's the smartest thing. That's the smartest thing that I think that I've heard all day for sure. If people want to come and listen to what I'm learning.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
If people want to come and listen to what I'm learning, because the problem is that so many of us, we become, was it Piper who came along years ago and said, brothers, we are not professionals.
Yes.
When we get to that place to where I'm a professional answer man, or I'm a professional, orator, or you came here for me to wow you, with my whatever I'm talking about. Like, that's a dangerous place. If you want to come and listen to what I'm learning, that's a brilliant phrase. Thank you for that. That's good. I'm going to probably use it and wear it out, and I'll probably say it's mine from this point forward. So,
well, I joke with people too, because I got a snarky sense of humor. They'll come out 2 or 3 times a year and say, man, I really appreciated that sermon. And I want to look at them and go, I have good material. We're using scripture. Why are you shocked? Why are you shocked that you're learning something and God's moving in you? So if you stay with the material, you ought to be pretty good at it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's true. I like that you say everybody has their own individual style. That's a thing. That's a phrase that always makes me nervous. It makes me not nervous. It makes me have to just check my gut a little bit every single time, because once it becomes about your style, that thing can move to the forefront so fast. Well, this is the kind of preacher he is. He's got this kind of style, or he's got this. But you're 100% right. And the reason I think that's important to nail down and find your voice,
Yes.
I think the reason that's important is because of what you said earlier. I'm not comfortable going on and on about what I do and what I do well and how I do it. But there is a spot inside of your head, like there is inside of my head, to where you come up to a text sometimes and you hit a wall and you begin to think to yourself, what in the world am I supposed to do with this?
Yeah.
Like, I can't find my way around it. And then what I have to go back to is the thing that I know he created me to do. This is the thing he created me to do. So, okay, that's what I got to do. So pull from that, and then that's your entry point. And for me, it's on the side of, inspire people to give God another look. You wrote him off. You're going to fold your tent up and you're going to leave camp and you weren't going to be here no more, but you heard something, and that's the thing right there. That's the entry point. So for Jared, you got to inspire. You got to go through that door first. What's the part in there that inspires you? Once you find that, go to the next part. So I appreciate what you said about that.
Well, and I think to even go deeper on that, I think each one of us needs to find our style, not invent our style. And that's what I hear you pushing back on, is the person who's got to come out and I'm going to dress a certain way and I'm going to look a certain way. That's just counter to who I am, because that's what I think people want. Instead of, I think that vulnerability of people being able to see that you are a pilgrim, just like they are, and you may be ahead of them on the journey, and you're looping back and saying, hey, the road ahead is going to be rough, but I'm going to walk it with you. That's what we get to do as pastors. Yeah. And so I'm not trying to create a style. I had to find my voice. And when I found my voice, I have this ridiculous thing I use with students, and that is, if you want to know if you're spiritually gifted, your tail wags when you get to do it. People are blessed when you do it, and they find God because of it. And you know your style when it's like, this is what I'm living to do. People seem to come and receive what I received. And at the end of the day, we're giving God glory. And I loved your word. And we're inspiring people to continue to walk in faith. Yeah. I'll do that the rest of my life. They don't have to pay me to. I'll do that for free. Yeah. Because that's what God created me to do. And if my style doesn't fit in one church over the other, I'm okay with that. I've been fortunate to find 2 churches that get me and let me teach. And I love them for it. And so that's the kind of relationship you want, I think. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. One of the things for me that kind of sold me on the writing side, because I've been doing some writing over the last few years, and golly,
When I sit down in the morning at my computer in my office at home, and there's no windows. That's an important thing. There's no windows. I'm a highly distractible individual. And nothing going on around. I don't need something to go by the window at all. So when I sit down in my office and I start typing, and then the next thing I hear is the garage door opening. I hear my family leave and go to school, and then I hear the garage door opening, and I think to myself, what? Did somebody forget something? Did they forget their lunch? And it's like, no, it's 4:30. It's 4:30.
Yeah.
You've been at this thing so incredibly. It's like, no wonder I'm hungry. Like, I'm starving to death. Like, this is crazy. I love that. I love that feeling, of just being completely immersed in that. And for me, that was one of the hooks. That was one of the hooks for me on ministry, on preaching, on church. Listen, it's got to conquer me. It's got to conquer me, It's got to, when it can overcome me, then I'm in. That's a sustainable thing. I could do this the rest of my life. It keeps getting the best of me over and over. I'm gonna keep coming back to that fight. I really like that. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, wonderful conversation. I appreciate that. When it comes to your preaching, when it comes to your style, how have you seen it change through the years?
I stopped. My high school baseball coach told me I had to have 100 at bats till I knew what my swing was. And what I realized is I've been able to preach. Students today in colleges get to go out and preach. They'll have 100 sermons before they graduate. I was 4 or 5 years in ministry before I had 100 sermons. So what I learned over the long pull was I stopped trying to be like the influencers that whose preaching I loved. I tried. I tried to be what I heard. And because it worked on me, and it was natural, it was unnatural rather, I was just channeling them. And then I just had someone pull me aside and spoke 2 or 3 words to me about what they thought I did really, really well. And I thought it was funny because there's this concept called native genius. It's something that each one of us does naturally that we think everybody does because it becomes so natural from us. And in that concept of native genius, when this person at the church spoke to me about what I did well, I thought everybody did that. And she grabbed me by the cheeks and she said, "No, Mark, when you do that, I've never seen anybody do it like you do it." That didn't mean I was special. It was like, oh, okay, go to your strengths, play to your strengths. It's not about me, but if that is communicating God's word effectively, stay in that lane. And that's when I said to myself, I'm a teacher. I'm not going to be ashamed to be a teacher. I don't have a lot of wordplay. I'm probably more tweetable than I ever want to admit, only because when it synthesizes in my head, it comes out in one sentence synopsis. That is something that happens to me when I'm preaching that's not on the paper. It's like, I think God looks at my notes and goes, "This is horrible, say this." And then all of a sudden it comes out of my mouth, and I know it works because I come off the stage and it's been tweeted 5 or 6 times. And I'm like, okay. So what I've learned over preaching is stop trying to be everybody that you're not and go with the thing that makes sense in your head while you're preaching. And I've found that's how God leads me best. So when I hear myself say that, I'm embarrassed because it's like, look what I do so well. No, I'm just realized after having had 3 decades of preaching that there is a voice that guides you in your preaching. Trust it. Especially the more experience you get. And we also have to listen to criticism. When my wife tells me after church on a couple Sundays, "You're not as funny as you think you are." I'm like, yeah, I am. But what she's saying is she loves me enough to say my humor has a cutting edge to it. And every now and then, if I haven't prepped people for it, what I think might be cute and funny and endearing is actually the opposite. So when someone affirms you, I think you need to trust that. And when someone is critical, I have to hear it.
Oh, goodness. I would love to sit down. And have lunch sometime and just get a piece of some of that cutting humor. I think I would enjoy that. I would enjoy the carving. Into me. When you talk about tweetable phrases like that, listen, my preaching, unfortunately, is much like my Twitter account, and I tweet like Trump. Okay, if that gives you any idea. Like, that's not enough. We don't need 140. More. Move. Here comes another one. This is part 1. This is part 2. Now you're about to get the rest of it right now. Part 3. So sit down, put your seatbelt on. We're going to take a ride here, and listen to what. So
we're living in an age where it's kind of amazing. It used to be I'd look out at an audience, and when heads went down and people started writing, I realized in that moment I'd said something. And many times while I'm preaching, I'm thinking, what did I just say that caused 5 people's heads to snap down and write it down? They may be writing blasphemy, I don't know, but they're writing something. Now it's kind of funny because the phone in my back pocket will vibrate, and I know what that means. I said something, and the younger generation is tweeting it, or they're posting it, or they're turning it into a meme. And I'm like, isn't it funny? The feedback we get is now more instantaneous than it used to be. Well, I say that I'm older than you, but it used to be when he was preaching in the 80s and 90s. You would see the physical reaction. Now you're getting this sensation like something was just said because all of a sudden my phone's vibrating right after something was said. And I think that's just kind of fascinating. You can't live for that. I mean, I turn off all notifications on Sundays because I don't want to come off a sermon I thought was good and say, oh, nobody found anything to tweet, because that becomes an idol too.
Uh-huh.
When it first came out, it was complimentary. Then it became needy, and I had to shut down all of that but I can look back on Sunday nights and think, of all the points I made with the Twitter crowd, this was the point they grabbed.
Yeah. That's incredible. I wish I could do that. And see, that's the thing. That's when you talk about the native genius part. When you can take that amount of information and whittle it down to a phrase that just captures the whole thing, that's the power. I mean, especially
when the Spirit leads you to synthesize everything you've been studying into that one clarifying sentence that even catches you off guard, right? That's one of the joys of preaching, is when something comes out of your mouth and your first thought is, I have never thought of that clearly and concisely before.
Yeah.
And that's the moment I just thank the Lord and go, wow, what a privilege we get to do what we do.
Yeah.
And, and when those moments come, it's like all that study, all that preparation, all that marination of meditating on this text, it all came together in one concise sentence. And I'm like, wow. Yeah. Now, if I would ever say that's tweetable, then someone needs to shoot me and take me off stage. Because we don't get to decide what lands. They tell us what lands.
Yeah.
But it's even those moments when the Holy Spirit's working and that hard desk work pays off with a deeper level of understanding. That inspiration is what I live for.
Yeah. Oh, man. It's the greatest job, isn't it?
Yeah. Outside of being a dad, it's the best thing I get to do.
Greatest job. I mean, that getting lit up like that. I mean, finding something that just moves you to a place of depth, to where your appreciation and I don't mean like my love for God deepens or my production for God, is better or even that my obedience is now greater. I just mean that depth of seeing more behind the veil, that piece of like, oh my goodness, like that is so incredibly, like you didn't have to let me know that, you didn't have to pull that back. You didn't have to, work through that stuff, but there's that reward for the hard digging, what you're talking about. Yeah, I absolutely love it.
Yep. And that, that moment when you get up on a Sunday morning or whenever you're preaching on a Saturday or Thursday or whatever, and you're standing there knowing in about 45 minutes, I get to walk on stage and I get to say this one line that God gave me, not that I wrote it, but some truth that he gave me that I get to shine. Like you said, there's no greater privilege in life than to be able to drop that bomb and walk away and let the Holy Spirit do what it's going to do.
Absolutely.
And, we've had times where probably both of us walked in the pulpit and we didn't have that moment. And then God gave it to us in the middle, and you're like, "Thank you." That was the parachute I needed.
Yeah. Listen, I've been in these commentaries all week long, and I have not found one thing. Up here it comes. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Whew, I didn't think you was going to show. I didn't think you was coming to church today. Oh man, Lord, I'm glad you came to church today. Like that's good news. What are when you talk about the need for affirmation and validation and people to recognize these kind of things. What are some of the other preaching pitfalls that are super easy for us to get into?
Stylistically trying to be what's popular instead of what's you.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain people who speak in prophetic voice. I have a friend, a very dear friend, and He's the reason I'm in Oronogo. He's one of two guys that got me here, and his name's Jason French, and he's now the president of Christ in Youth. And Jason is one of the most dynamic, intense speakers I've ever heard. He speaks prophetically all of the time. And if I tried to live in that realm, it's not who I am. And I think that's one of the pitfalls. I'm going to sound like the old get off your lawn guy, but today with the availability of other people's sermons and their hard or hard desk work, I'm really fearful of the shortcuts that are not sustainable for a person who hasn't learned to write. There is something about having to walk in, back in my day, having to walk in on a Sunday night after you preached your heart out Sunday morning. And of all the lessons you had to write that week, Wednesday night, Sunday school, and Sunday morning, for me, Sunday night was always the fourth, and it got no good time. There wasn't enough hours in the week. And to walk in there desperately knowing you had not prepared well, you had not dug deep, you didn't have much to offer, but you still had to fill it. Those things keep you from taking shortcuts. When you can go draw Tim Keller or draw Piper, or you can draw Matt Chandler offline and you can preach your material, it's not that they're doing a wrong thing. They're just not doing a sustainable thing. Yeah. And I fear that today the convenience of other people's insights keeps us from growing. And I thank God for a church in Mount Pleasant, Michigan, who for 22 years let me learn how to preach there. And for 10 to 15 of those years put up with candy. But every one of those at-bats has taught me how to learn, taught me how to write, taught me how to study. And those embarrassing moments in the pulpit put me right back in the room going, I'll never put myself in that position again. That's unfair to them and me. Yeah. So I think losses are as important as wins. So I know I'm running around the block, but for me, it's those shortcuts that are not sustainable. They'll get you through this weekend. And every now and then, people need parachutes, I guess. And it's really easy to take someone else's idea and sell it as your own. But there's a dissatisfaction at the end of the day when you know that what you did was you didn't honor the privilege. You didn't do the work. Now, you and I both know when you're in a church and life hits you in the face and there's a funeral and there's a pipe break and the bus crashes and all these kind of things going on in your world, you may only have 2 hours to write a sermon. God's in that 2 hours. Mm. It's when you had 6 hours and you gave it 45 minutes on an online search. I fear what's going to happen to the depth of our theology when it's always borrowed. Mm-hmm. I think those are the pitfalls. And right now, this advent of celebrity preachers, especially when I remember when people in Michigan would say, I'm the best preacher in the state of Michigan. They'd never been to any other church. And I would smile. I'm like, that's cute, but you have no idea that 6 blocks from here, this guy can preach me under the table.
Right.
And what happens when they hear the best and the greatest all the time, there becomes a dissatisfaction with the relationship of a local church. Why can't our preacher be like this guy? Or why can't he be like this guy? So I love what you're doing here. You're actually introducing styles out there to simply say, isn't it amazing how God has let all of us have a place, even though our talent is so diverse and varied. So I think those are the pitfalls. It's the hard work of digging to find the diamonds. Doesn't have to happen today.
Yeah. You are a baseball guy, and here's what else I hear you say when you're talking. My buddy Luke says this all the time. Think about the resiliency of a baseball player. If they can hit 300, they're a great player. That means they failed 7 out of 10 times.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And you have a little bit of that, don't you? Like you have a little bit of that. You don't mind getting raked over something and learning something from it.
Well, what do? You quit, or you get up there and prove them wrong.
Yeah,
it's when you fail yourself, when you disappoint your own heart because you didn't give it what it needed, you didn't give it the effort you could have. Those are the moments that I hope stays bitter in all of our hearts to say, I'm better than that. God deserves more than that, and I'm going to come back next week and I'm going to show you that research and study and prayer and preparation matters.
Got you. I don't want to talk about this long. I just want to ask. Have you bit into the Enneagram at all?
Yeah.
And?
I'm a 5. Are you asked? Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
So being an introvert and living in that realm of, I want to make sure I'm ready. If you give me an opportunity, I want to honor it. I don't want to fail you or disappoint you. I'm going to work really, really hard because this matters to me. Yeah. And so I was so scared. I'm going to be careful. I was so scared I was one number because I can be pretty bold. And when I saw that number and I didn't test out that way, I thank Jesus for that. So do you do color code? We use color code as our staff.
I'm familiar with it. I'm familiar
Okay.
with it. Didn't dive into it too deep.
I'm a red white. So my
Uh-huh.
running joke with our staff is the red in me, either I care 100% and I'm passionate about it, or the white says I really don't care at all, do what you want.
Do
And
what you
so
want.
I can vacillate between those two positions. I'm really, really, really passionate, or I'm willing to go, hey, go take an at bat, see what happens.
Well, let me tell you something. Other than the 7 on the Enneagram, 5 is my favorite number. My wife is a 5.
Yeah.
So I've had to do ample research on
Yes.
exactly what it is that the 5 needs, and such a cool number. And it's kind of funny, really. I don't know. Maybe other people won't notice this, but you're a preacher. You're in the public eye. You spend a load of time with other people in the middle of their stuff. So that means you have to find some way to block off and not let everybody have your avarice, your like the avarice part, right? Like
Absolutely.
you can't give people all the energy. So what do you do? What do you do to bail out of those situations where people start to tax you just a little too much?
Well, when I was, and I know this is probably a good portion of your audience, when it was just me and a youth minister and an office manager, I died.
Mm.
My pump would start sucking mud quicker than everybody else's, and I felt like I was failing. And there was a lot of moments that I wondered why I was in ministry. Outside of loving to preach and teach, the rest of it was wearing the tread right off my tires. And I didn't know how to Sabbath. And what I would do is I'd get away. My introversion would cause me to spend 2 or 3 hours with a book or go for a long walk where no one could touch me. And praise God, the days before a cell phone, because I could disappear and there was no punishment for not being available. And I would recharge my battery. What I had to learn was how to Sabbath with God. And I'm not really good at that. It's kind of embarrassing, but I get away to recharge very selfishly my battery. But what I've never really learned to do well. This is my challenge to all ministers, is to live in such a way that you don't worry about justifying your paycheck, but you do justify your relationship with the one you serve. And that took me a long time to realize introversion is not a sin. It's a reality.
Yeah.
And so, I always tease our staff. I said, we Christians, we don't drink, smoke, do drugs. So I just cheeseburgered myself into happiness. I would reward myself with food. And it took me a long time to realize that was just as much an intoxication for me, was when I felt like I was being picked on or I couldn't perform well enough to please everybody. And in a smaller church, man, my heart goes out to those guys who don't have a staff person that could run to the hospital when they got nothing to offer. Mm-hmm. And so you bring up a real passion point for me. It's these young guys in these churches. I like to come around and encourage them. Hey, call us. We will help you with this, because when you're pump sucking mud, you got no fresh water to offer anybody.
Yeah.
And often we find out too late, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
It shows up in the pulpit. It shows up in our homes, and we don't recognize it until someone says, "Are you okay?"
Yeah. Yeah. We are about the third or fourth in line on who finds that information out.
Yeah. And I think it's right. And so having people in your world that help you with that. I love people. I tease my wife. I do love people desperately. Sometimes they just can't tell. And I have to learn as a pastor. I did learn how to do that, but it takes a lot more energy from me than someone like who you're an extrovert and you love people and you love the energy of that.
Yeah.
So sometimes if I would compare myself to you, I'd get real discouraged.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. And here's the thing. Food is a common thing for fives too, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that becomes the escape, right?
Yeah, it's a private compensation.
I was just getting ready to say, because if you're going to drink, you got to go somewhere to get it. You got to sit at the bar, and that's the problem. Like you can't. Yeah. I don't want that. I just want to pull up. I want to push a button. I want to talk to somebody I can't see. I want to give money to someone, take my food and run.
It's so transactional. It's embarrassing.
I love it. Well, like I said, my wife is a 5, and I can tell you what you do for the world what you do for the world is create a canvas for the rest of us to live. It's a stable place for us to come in and throw paint all over stuff. And you're able to sit there and tolerate all of our poor drawings, all of our poor stories, and be able to just drink in as much of it as you can drink in, and then generously, kindly dismiss yourself from it. And the rest of us get to walk off and go, oh, he's such a great guy. I love that guy. He's such a great guy. He lets me be me. And that's such a wonderful thing. So yeah, that's a great deal. 5. It's one of my favorites. So yeah, I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, and I believe it was Rob Bell who said he is a 7 with a 7 wing. I think. Yeah. I think that's the way he described it when I heard him speak of it before. So 7 with a 7 wing. I don't think I'm quite that far. But a 7 at the end of the day. We had a cool interaction, and I would tell anybody, and I know there's a lot of buzz right now, Enneagram, and some churches are saying, stay away from it. It's all very humanistic and all this kind of thing. But if you want to find new value for people, and the Enneagram is one of the things that really helped me with that. Being able to take somebody and say, what do you do with somebody like this person? What do you do with this person? I don't know what to do. All of a sudden, the Enneagram put him in a position of, oh my goodness, I didn't see the gift, I didn't see the talent, I didn't see the abilities in there.
I don't know that, and I agree. I know there's a lot of caution on it. The value that I find is it allows me to find, like when I read the number and I read the description, I was like, yeah, that is the best and worst of me. And because you can't self-assess, you're like, wow. And then you see how that triggers other people. But, we've got staff members here who don't ever call me a blue or a red or a white or a yellow. And we're not doing it that way. But when you walk in my office, I now understand what your motivation is. Mm-hmm. And if I'm going to pastor you and be your teammate, I want to bless you. And the way to bless you is to help you with the motivation that makes you whole.
Right.
And I agree. Anything that when they start putting numbers in, you're a dolphin and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, whatever. Right. But it helped me to understand me, and I'm a complicated personality. So it was useful.
Yeah. When I first jumped into it, I sat and I went through the assessment, did it all. Then I came in and I said, I'm pretty sure my buddy Luke is a 1. Pretty sure he's a 1. So I take it in and I said, hey, let me read this to you. The loud internal critic, all the stuff, the guilt, everything's motivated by a guilt or an anger or high on rules and order and, this kind of thing. And I said, hey, I want to read this to you. So I read him the compatibility between the 1 and the 7. And this is a guy who, not an emotive guy. In fact, what he says is there's one emotion and it's angry. It's just anger. That's it. So I read him this and I said, hey, I want you to read this. And he read it and he goes, oh my goodness, Jared, we need to hug. Like this is powerful. Like I had instantly this guy who's just always kind of been an arm's length guy I've known my whole life was like, oh my goodness, there's so much value. Like it took you that long to figure out I'm valuable to you. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
It was excellent. It was excellent. So, well, hey, I don't know how you are on time, so don't let me hold you up if you need to get going. I got a couple more questions here.
Yeah.
But
okay, go ahead.
Okay. Real quick, I want to know this part. When it comes to preaching, mm-hmm. What are the things that you notice in other guys when you hear something, see something? It's a thing that really trips your trigger. You notice it. Jeff Fall said consistency. When I hear somebody who just consistently knocks it out of the park and they have that deal, what do you notice?
When someone's stream of consciousness is intentional, it's heading someplace. My preaching professor at Great Lakes Christian College in Michigan was named Justin Shepard, and he used to pound this on us, and we'd make fun of him for it, but I live by it every day. He said, say something. He said, don't go in there and preach to preach. Go in there to say something. Offer truth, offer hope, offer inspiration. When I see someone who every step there was no wasted motion, that is like, I love that moment where I'm like, I was just led by the hand to see this vista I never would have seen on my own. And that to me is and I loved when Jeff said that, because I think a person who does that week in and week out is gifted and cares.
Yeah.
Sometimes you hear op-ed pieces, right? Opinion editorials.
Mm-hmm.
No one goes to church to hear my ideas about anything. But if I can show them what
Yeah.
God just showed me, if I run back on the path and I
Yeah.
take them down and say, you got to see what I just saw. When someone does that to me, I owe them my soul. I am so indebted to that. So that's what inspires me in preaching. I look for that moment where it's like, oh my goodness, you got me to this point and I didn't even see you doing it.
Mm.
Because my wife will say I'm a bad sermon listener because my head's down, I'm staring at the floor because I'm easily distracted. When someone's preaching, I'm visually, mentally following their journey and where they're taking me. And sometimes I'm disappointed where we end up. I can still learn something on the journey, but I missed the best part somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other moments that they drop me right on that vista, and I'm like, holy smoke, that was brilliant. And that to me is the most inspiring thing. And I can hear that on a podcast. I can see it in a live presentation, but it's like, wow, you took me. If no one else went with us, I was so glad you took me there.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's cool. That's cool. What about these guys that are out there? They're getting banged up in ministry, and their boundaries are terrible. They have no idea how to put boundaries up there. They don't have the ability that the 5 has to be able to push it back and be like, stay on your side of the fence, please. Stay over there. They don't have that thing. They don't have the capacity to just ingest and just love and use that as energy. But they're just getting banged to pieces. They're discouraged. They're beat up. What do you tell guys like that?
Well, I'm going to use a term that I don't want to pile on to their pain, but there's a lot in ministry today that's justifying our paycheck. We've created job descriptions for ministers so that the church can go, well, okay, at least they're earning what we pay them. And we've misappropriated that 100%. Now, we both know that there are people lazy in ministry, and they've ruined it for a lot of people. Because basically they check the mail, they go home, they have a long lunch, call me if you need me. That's not a ministry. That's not a purpose. What I want to say to the guy who is working his tail off is what I said that's been missing in my ministry for a lot of years. And now that I've begun to find it, it's of value. You have to have a community of people who you can just pour your heart out to, somebody who gets it. Yeah. You have to do that respectfully toward the church. And you have to have a Sabbath in your life that you spend with God, crying out to him. I know this is going to sound like a strange digression, but it's not. I always found it fascinating. And I used the number of years I've been in ministry, not that I'm an expert, but the experiences I've had have been repetitive. And in 32 years of preaching, anytime I wanted to leave, nobody wanted me. And every time I felt like I was safe at home, I would get a phone call. And I looked at God going, can you throw a guy a bone here? When I was drowning, you let me just float. And I realized, no, he actually didn't. He strengthened me. And so the guy who's wondering, does it matter? It does matter. You have to separate your calling from what you're doing to justify your paycheck. So when a student at Ozark comes to me and says, what am I supposed to do here? We're really trying to decide 2 things. Are you called into this life-giving ministry of the gospel? And can you do that in the midst of justifying your paycheck? So have some older people in your life who understand it, and go and speak to them and get clarity from them. And then before you make any big rash decisions, or you develop any attitude of digression from your ministry, spend some time in the presence of God. Have that Job moment where you unpack all of that. The bitterness that we hold in because we're professionals, the Psalms don't allow that.
Yeah, right.
And there's a difference between ratting your church out to a couple of buddies at a round of golf or over a cheeseburger at a restaurant, and actually doing the hard soul work of asking yourself, what am I contributing to this? And how can, if I ever ask a preacher who's down that comes and talks to me, I'll ask him this question. If you could design a ministry using your gifts, how would you spend a day? Do you know how many preachers can't answer that question? Because they've always been doing the job description. So my word of encouragement is there is still a calling and a vision inside of you to proclaim the gospel. And can you do that in your context? Because most of us, the answer is I can. But I'm not been allowed to. Okay, carve time out to spend with God, asking him. I would love nothing more than to have 3 coffees a week with guys who are struggling in their faith. God, could I do that for you? Watch what he does. But what we're doing is we're having man conversations between management and employee. And that's where most guys, I think, get stuck in my experience. I've been there. And when you get into a place where you're free to use your ministry, you'll work harder than they could ever develop a job description. So cast a vision of what ministry could look like if we weren't justifying our paychecks.
Yeah.
And I said, in my heart, Jared, is I don't want to say that because there'll be a couple of guys out there who will be like, they won't let me. Take that to the Lord because he has called you into this. And you're not an employee. You're a messenger. You're a missionary. And you can do that. Even in the midst of some of the ticky-tack stuff we have to do, you can still get that done powerfully. And I think we lose vision because it becomes a job. Back to Piper's book, we're not professionals. Yeah. But when we've lost the vision of what a day would be like, ministering to people, loving on them, teaching and discipling, that's what we need to restore. It has less to do with the job description. It has more to do with the vision of why we're doing the things we're doing.
So good. So good. You got me all weepy here, Mark. That's so good. So good. That makes me so thankful for where I am. The first thing that Dave Erickson said to me when I emailed him, he said, pastor to church, and I do a podcast. And I said, would you be interested in being on? He said, you're a pastor at a church? I said, yeah. He goes, and you do a podcast? He said, yeah. He goes, how do you find the time to do that? I said, I'm in a unique situation. I'm in a very unique situation. I'm in a very healthy situation. I got some really great people around me who, I'm able to serve, and the elders at this church are great. So for me, everything you just said, you're 100% right. You gotta go through the dark times. You can't just bail out. You can't just pull the cord, bail out of those situations, like what you said, when I'm ready to go, ready to leave. No, stay put. You and me need to talk about some of this stuff. So good. Thank you for that.
Just a book. And then I want to honor the time you have too. There's a book called Under the Unpredictable Plant by Eugene Peterson. And if I would have been mature enough to know and read that book when I was in my 20s, I probably would still be serving the church I served in Michigan.
Really?
Because I'm so convicted by what he does with Jonah in that book that talks to us about the lessons we learn by staying planted deeply and not being frustrated by some of the things expected of us in a professional culture. And so if anyone's out there hurting, I would really encourage you to read Under the Unpredictable Plant by Eugene Peterson. It would be an encouragement to your soul. Perfect.
We didn't even get to talk about leadership or conflict resolution. Can we do this again sometime?
Oh, I would love to. I've created enough conflict in my ministry. I'm a pro at it now.
I doubt it. I bet you're great. So, hey, thank you so much for doing this. This is so good. I'm not let down one single bit. Not one single bit. This is perfect. This is perfect. So, thank you. And I'll next time I'm over that way, maybe I'll look you up and I'll try to.
I'll buy lunch. I'd be happy to.
Cool, Mark. Thank you so much for your time.